Hey, you guys. So this is Mr. Boaitey, and this is our next installment of the AVID Fireside Chats. Today, we're blessed to have Dr. Karama Neal with us. And out of full disclosure, Dr. Karama Neal is my wife. So there you have it. But she was, gracious enough to pop in with us just to share some things. And I thought she would be a wonderful person also to just share it with us in these chats. So I'm going to let her just say a little bit about herself, and then we're going to get started.
Thank you so much, Mr. Boaitey, for this invitation to talk with you and to talk with your students. I'm really thrilled to be here and to be able to talk with you guys a little bit. So again, as Mr. Boaitey said, I'm Karama Neal. I am currently administrator for Rural Business-Cooperative Service at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I've been there since April, so it's a fairly new role for me. Previously was at Southern Bancorp Community Partners, a community development loan fund that focused in rural Arkansas and Mississippi. And I was there for 12 years. And I'll get into more stuff, I guess, as we have our questions. But that's where I am now.
All right. All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And we are also, too, proud of you and blessed to have you have the opportunity to receive an appointment as such. I think it's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing. And that we know you. All right. All right. So our first question is this. If you could give advice to your middle school self, your 12, 13, 14-year-old self, what would it be and why?
It's a really good question, right? It would be nice for all of us if we could go back and tell our younger selves what we've learned and what to worry about and what not to worry about and what to be excited about, what not to be maybe excited about, and those kinds of things. When you asked that, though, I thought about a couple of things. I think maybe because I'm talking to you all in the context of education, I'll keep it I'll focus kind of there. I mean, I think at that age, I definitely knew school was important. That was clear. That was school being critical and being important was something that I was always brought up with. So that I didn't question that. What I didn't know at the time when I was in middle school was why. And I think now, later, years after being in middle school, I would say that, doing well in school gives you choices. And I think that's really, really important as you grow up and as, things happen, life happens, you have different opportunities, you meet different people, you want to be different places, and you want choices. You want to be able to do what you kind of want to do. And being well educated allows you to have those kinds of choices. It's not the only thing that does, but it's certainly one of those things that can get you a lot of choices in life. And I think that's at least for me, that's something I really value for myself and for my family as well. And so I think it's important to take school seriously. I don't, knowing myself when I was in middle school, those people who did know me, I'm from Arkansas, and so some folks do knew me from before, know that I did take school very seriously then. But I would also tell myself that the choices and the kinds of decisions I was making then, as long as they were choosing between, reasonable, good options, didn't have to last forever. So at the time I wanted to be a scientist. I ended up getting a PhD in genetics. I'm not doing that now. And I don't know that I would have expected that at the time. I think I wouldn't have even known how to process that option. So I think, you don't have to decide whether you want to be a doctor or a journalist or a banker or a scientist or whatever. You don't have to be locked in if you have those options, if you've been well educated and know how to learn.
Karama, what I appreciate is that why thing, that why component. And I think, I know even myself as a teacher and just in general, all of us walking the earth, it's very important to know why, or to have some concept to throw that question out to yourself. So at least consider why you're doing what you're doing. What is the impetus? Mm-hmm. And so I really appreciate that in terms of that it does provide you with choices, a vehicle for choices later in your life or in your life. And I appreciate, thank you so much. And I know that's in keeping very much with the AVID program, mm-hmm. To bridge that opportunity gap to allow for all of us to have choices. Mm-hmm. I think that's great. Okay, so the second question is this. Did you go to college? If so, why did you go? Where did you go? Describe the experience and how it impacted your life, who you are, and what you're doing today. If not, why didn't you go? Describe your experiences and how they impacted your life, who you are, and what you're doing today.
Another good question. You ask these things, it makes you think about stuff. So I thought about three things, three really important people to me. My grandmother, Vanilla Cobb was her name. She and my mother both were born in a little town in Southwest Arkansas that today has about 89 people in it. I think it's 89, maybe 88. It's a really small town. It was a small town then. My grandmother moved and her family moved to Camden, Arkansas.
I'm sorry,
And
Carl. I'm sorry, Carl.
yeah,
What was the name of that town?
Ozanne, Arkansas, in Hempstead County, just outside Hope. And they moved to Camden, Arkansas, and lived there for a number of years. That's where my mother went through all of her schooling and such. And when my mother was, and my mother has a younger brother, my uncle. And when my mom was a junior in high school, just before her junior year, they moved to Little Rock. And my grandmother always said, and I knew my grandmother very well, I was very close to her. She always said the reason they moved was so that her children could go to college. They moved because if they figured they were living in Camden, she figured if they moved to Little Rock, she had some relatives, some cousins who were living in Little Rock already. She moved to Little Rock. She figured she could probably get a job because her cousins could help her find a job. She ended up working as a domestic for a number of years. And she figured there were colleges in Little Rock. And her thought at the time was that her kids could go to Philander and live at home. And because they wouldn't have room and board expenses, they could probably afford it and make that work so that her kids could go to college. So the whole reason they moved to Little Rock was so her kids could go to college. So I grew up hearing that story. My mom did go to college. My uncle did go to college. They didn't go. My mom went to what is now UAPB. At the time was Arkansas Agricultural Mechanical and Normal in Pine Bluff. So they didn't go to Philander as the initial plan was, but they absolutely went to college because they knew how important that was. So I saw my grandmother make that really important life decision to prioritize college. I saw my mother, of course, go to college, and she had set an expectation for me to go to college. And that was always, it was never a option. It was what you did. And even though I wasn't raised, around with my father, my mother was a single mother, I saw his example. He finished college after I was born. And, he started college just after high school and then went and lived a life and then came back and finished college much later. I saw him go to law school and live in Marianna, Arkansas, and commute every day to go to law school, to go to night school at what is now Bowen School of Law in Little Rock, driving his car every day, an hour and 37 minutes back and forth to go to law school. So I saw that commitment to education. And so, his example and the example of both my mom and my grandmother, I think were really helpful for me in understanding, why I might go to college. So, what did I learn? Where did I go? That kind of stuff. I went to a college called Swarthmore College. It's fairly small. It's about, at the time, about 1,300 students in just outside of Philadelphia. Fairly well regarded, highly ranked school. That's what I wanted. I've intentionally wanted to go to school in the Northeast. I say this now, but I did not say this at the time, but I knew it at the time. I thought that I would never come back to the South again when I left. And I think that's something that I really learned in college. And it's something that I think it's important for a number of folks. I think it's important to spread your wings and try something new and see how other people do things and get out. And maybe college is the time to do that. Maybe it's another time in life. But I think it's important to do that if you're led in that way. And I certainly was. And I think, at least for me, doing that at that time made me understand in a different way how wonderful Arkansas was. I don't think I recognized that, as I said, when I knew enough not to say that out loud when I was coming out of high school, but I was coming out and I had no expectation to ever live in the South again. And about 2 months or so after being in Pennsylvania, although I enjoyed it and I made wonderful, wonderful friends and had a great time there, I knew that I was coming back to the South. And in fact, when I went to grad school, that was one of my requirements. It had to be in the South. I ended up going to grad school in Atlanta and living in Atlanta for 14 years. But I think had I not acknowledged that I really wanted to try something different, had I not been supported, thankfully my mom and my grandmother were very supportive in me going away, even though they were going to miss me, and I missed them a ton too. They were supportive of that. I don't think I would have had that realization. I don't know that I would have realized how much Arkansas actually is a great place and how much opportunity it provides and how much you can really make a difference here and how much, the lifestyle and the beauty of the state. I don't know that I would have realized that had I not gone away at the time. So I think that was really important. The other thing I'll say just quickly in response to that question, which is really, really important to me and something I don't know that I had little inklings of, but I really got to learn a lot better when I was away, is that we are very competitive. And I think sometimes, and again, I'll speak for myself. I don't want to put this on other folks, although I've heard other folks say similar kinds of things. I think sometimes it's real easy to think, we're growing up in this state where we are last on all the things you don't want to be, the list you don't want to be last on, and we're first on all the lists we don't want to be first on. And sometimes we think that, maybe what I'm doing, maybe I'm doing okay, or I'm doing really well, but maybe I'm not competitive with everybody else. Maybe I can't really shine because, I'm in this state that everybody acts like it's so, it's in such a bad condition. Of course, we know that that's not true in many ways. It's people's perception, their incorrect perceptions, but it's easy to internalize that stuff, particularly as a child. And I know I internalized some of that myself, to be quite honest. Going away showed me firsthand, and nobody had to tell me that, showed me firsthand that I was prepared, that I could do this, that I was well prepared, that my teachers and my parents and my family and my school and my church and my neighborhood prepared me well. And I think that's something, again, that it's easy not to know unless you put yourself in a situation where you can show that. And I think for me, that was really important. And I would just encourage folks as they think about what their options are, not to cut yourself off from options that might seem hard or might seem unusual. Certainly some of the things I did, I think sometimes folks thought they were a little bit unusual. But don't cut yourself off from those things because you don't want to have regrets in your life. So I think that was really important to me, to sort of recognize the value of Arkansas and recognize how much Arkansas had prepared me to be of service, in this case, where I am now, to the whole country.
Thank you very much. Okay, so our fourth question is this, or our third question is this: what does success mean to you? Would you call yourself successful? Why or why not?
People have such different words of success. So I don't know that I would call myself successful because I don't know what other folks think when they hear that. But would I say for myself that I'm successful? I think, yeah. And mostly it's because I think, it goes back to what I said earlier. It's about choice. And I feel so blessed to have been able to have been supported and had the opportunity to build, to kind of craft a life that has given me choices, and has given my family choices. And I think that to me is really important. I think it's important that, if at the time when we moved to Arkansas, in part because my mom was ill, that we were okay with that. We felt like we could get a job, we could get jobs, and we could afford to live here, and we could do the things that we needed to do. That's important. And it doesn't mean you have to take advantage of every choice that's offered to you, but it's nice to have the choices. I think about that when I think a lot about, sort of fights for equal rights and for equality. It's about, in large part, having the same palette of options that everyone else has, and then being fully able to choose which option really works for you and for your family and for the things that's important to you. So I think that's important. I think, and that's not something. The other reason I probably wouldn't say, yes, I'm successful, is because it makes it sound like there's an end point and it's there and you're done. And that's not done at all. I mean, I talk about, choice and being able to have options in life and have the same options everyone else has, regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of sexuality, regardless of where you live, regardless of zip code, all those kinds of things, regardless of disability status. That choice is really important, but it's ongoing, right? So I think about, as you think about long-term, even retirement, if I'm 75 years old, if I want to work, I want to work. If I don't want to work, I don't want to work because I could be able to also be retired, the idea of having that choice, it doesn't mean that you have to do the one thing or the other, but it means you have a choice around doing that. And again, I just think that being able to maximize those choices, being able to have the same kinds of choices that everyone else has, to me is really important. And I think that, and it's not something that we've achieved. I don't think anyone's achieved that yet. It's something we work toward, something I work toward both for myself and for my family, but for society at large. And I think that is, one way of thinking about success.
I appreciate that. And it's neat to hear this, the thread of choice, and that being connected to education,
Mm-hmm.
And so our mission is to prepare students to be college and career ready,
Mhm.
So certainly if you're preparing for college, you will be prepared for your career. Do you know what I
Mhm.
mean? And I
That's
think
right.
that it's a wonderful thing, and to highlight that. So thank you very much. Okay, so then this is a question, and it follows right after what you were just saying about being college and career ready. So we know that being college and career ready takes grit, persistence, perseverance, not giving up, and being open to new ideas. How did you develop or cultivate this essential skill?
It is really is those skills are absolutely essential. And um, I think I would say a couple of things. So one, I think is being goal oriented. Um, and here's the at least to me here's the critical thing, right? It's to have a goal that is meaningful to you, that is personal to you, not somebody else's goal, but your goal. Is I think generally the most important, because sometimes it takes that perseverance, that grit, and you gotta want it for yourself. And so having that goal is really important. But I think it's also really important not to be so wed to that goal, so married to that goal, so um, committed to that goal that you don't see other options when they might be there for you. And I say that as someone who, when I was 6 years old, my mother gave me a microscope, and I was pretty clear on that day. That was the day I stopped believing in Santa Claus, because I understood Santa Claus didn't give presents like microscopes. So, um, but I decided pretty much at that time that I wanted to be a scientist, and I focused on that. I started working in a lab when I was in high school at UAMS. I majored in biology in college. I went and got my after college, I came back and I taught at the math and science school, taught chemistry there for a year. I was only going to be there a year because I was going to grad school. I went to grad school, got my PhD in genetics. I started working in bioinformatics, worked in bioinformatics for a number of years, got my master's in bioethics. Like, I was committed to this stuff, right? And then as I went on, I sort of thought through, like, what does this life mean to me? If I wanted to be, as a time, I wanted to be initially, I wanted to be an academic scientist. That means I wanted to be, have a lab at a university and teach and do research and publish papers and do those kinds of things, some of which I still do in some ways now. But to do that kind of life meant there were going to be sacrifices I was going to have to make. It meant that, I'll just say this real briefly. Typically, if you're going to go, you finish your PhD, you go do a postdoc, you typically go someplace else. So you move again to go do a postdoc, then you have to go get a job, and you move again for that. And hopefully you get what's called tenure at your first professorship job. But if you don't, then that's another 7 years after that, you got to move again. I didn't want to do that. And I had to weigh really hard. And it was really personally it was a challenging time to really think through, what do I really want? And do I really want, if having this career that I said I've been wanting since sixth grade, that I've worked in so many ways so hard for, if it means these other kinds of sacrifices, is it worth it? And I decided it wasn't. And I've been fine with that. I had a full career in the sciences. I did a lot of stuff. I got my papers published. My dissertation still gets cited. It's there. I had a full career, and then it was time to change. And so I think, while having that goal is really, at least for me, and I think for many others, is really critical, being able to persevere, to see through, because you know what you have your eyes on the prize, right? You know what you're looking for. Um, you don't want to be so blinded to that. I think it's probably not healthy to be so committed to it that you can't see anything else. You can't see the other things that might be, other opportunities that might be there. It may mean that you stay exactly where you are, but you want to make that it's a choice thing, right? You want to make that an active decision. And so I would say that's important. The other thing I would say is, when you think about having grit and having, perseverance, I think it's important to sort of recognize the outcomes of that on the near term, right? So sometimes our goals can be very far away. They can be, 6 years old, you decide you want to be a scientist. That's a long haul, right? It's a long time. And so, if that was what it was for me, for other people, it may be different kinds of goals. But being able to see the short-term impact, the sort of near-term progress, so that you can mark steps, you can see that you're making steps toward your goal, you can see that progress, acknowledging that progress for yourself, ideally having others acknowledge it for you and be supportive of you, but at the very least, being able to acknowledge yourself. You know what? I was here 3 years ago, now I'm here, and I'm doing better. I'm on the path. I think being really intentional about that kind of stuff is really, really important, because it's hard. It's not easy. It's hard. in most cases. I mean, life ain't been no crystal stair. It's things are hard oftentimes. And so you've got to keep a mindset on where it is you're trying to go, and acknowledge when you're making that progress, and pat yourself on the back and congratulate yourself and give yourself a hug when you've made those, when you see yourself making that kind of progress.
Karama, as you were talking, I was thinking about a story that you've shared when you were going for your dissertation, your thesis. And the reason why it came to my mind is because I think that it also demonstrates, yes, about goal setting, but also too, something else that also helps to inform us, that grounds us, where that sense of grit and perseverance can come from. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Do you mind hearing that, Karama?
Is this the story for right just before I was supposed to defend my dissertation?
Yes.
So I was a PhD takes a long time, 5 to, in some cases, 10 or more years, depending on what it is you're doing, how your research is going. And unlike some other degrees, this is not to diminish them at all, but if you're going through law school or to med school, there are a certain number of classes that you take. There are certain tests you take. If you pass those, you get the degree. And I'm not saying that's easy, but it's very clear and it's very defined and it's very finite. You can usually do that in 3 years if it's law school, or 4 years if it's med school. And again, I'm not saying that that's necessarily easy, but I'm saying it's very defined and it's very discrete. Whereas a PhD program, typically you are in some ways at the mercy of your committee. You have a committee of, in my case, it was 5 people. That's where I went at Emory University. You have a committee of five professors who would evaluate your work. And when they decided you were ready to get your PhD, that's when you got it, right? So it's a very different kind of process in that regard. And you have to be mentally prepared for that. So I had gone through this process. I was about 6 years in, and was about to defend my dissertation. I had written, had gotten 2 papers published, had written this dissertation. It's about that thick, and had done my research. And the very next day was going to stand up and defend this work, talk about my work, answer questions on it, and ideally at the end of that be awarded my PhD. My mother was coming in town. This was to hear my defense. This is the big deal. This is the culmination of really everything you work for. If you can't call yourself a scientist after you finish your PhD, I don't know when you can. So that, for this 6-year-old's dream, this is what this is tied to. The man whose lab I was working in, frankly, was not as supportive, I think, as he could have been. And the day before I was scheduled to defend my dissertation, he called me into his office and told me that I didn't actually deserve to finish. He was only letting me finish, and the only reason I was going to finish at all, if I did, was because he told my committee to pass me, and I really didn't deserve a PhD. I'm a little choked up when I think about that now. And I remember looking at him, and the first thing that came to my mind was not when I say this story, what I think one might think, which is like, I can't believe you say that, or get mad, or get sad, or get scared. Like, what is going to happen? My mother's coming. So, like, none of that came to me. What came to me was a story that I'd grown up hearing from my grandmother. She was the oldest child. She was very much a daddy's girl, and she told this story about one time when she was probably about 5 or 6 years old, maybe 7, and she was going in this tiny town that I mentioned of about, I don't know how many people there were then, but it was a small town. And they were walking to church one Sunday. And my great grandfather, her dad, was going to church early for something. In my head, they were going to like light the wood or something like that to heat the church up. I don't know exactly why they were going early, but they were going over early. And she, because she was such a daddy's girl, she was going to tag along with him. And so they went to church, and they got to church, and everybody was kind of in a tizzy. Like the church wasn't the normal sort of happy and, just ready for Sunday morning service kind of place. Everybody was a little nervous. You could feel the tension, evidently. And she said when they came in, he said, somebody pulled him over, and his name was Joe Mansuttle, as they called him, Man. I said, Man, what are we going to do? The Klan is here. What are we going to do? And indeed, the Klan was there in their full white robes and their hooded hats, little eyes poked out, full gear, 4 or 5 of them. And they're there at this church, at this little St. Mark CME church in Ozanne, Arkansas. And everybody just didn't quite know what to do when your Klan shows up in full gear in your church, right? And so evidently my great-grandfather told them, said, well, let's sit them in the front. And I remember as a kid, I used to think, sit them in the back, make them sit in the back, because we have to sit in the back. And then I realized you don't put the Klan at your back, you need to put the Klan at the front so you can see what they're doing. So the Klan sat down in the front. They had service. I don't know what the sermon was about. I don't know if they put anything in offering, but they had service. And at the end of that service, that nothing other than them showing up in their full robes happened. There's no violence or no threats or anything like that. But at the end of that service, everybody got up to, what you would typically do at church, you'd have fellowship. And my great-grandfather walked over to this row of Klansmen in their full robes and their little pointy hats and headgear and such, and covered faces, and called each one of them by name. How you doing, Mr. So-and-so? Glad to have you here, Mr. Adams. Welcome, Mr. Jones. Hope to see you again, Mr. So-and-so. Called each one of them by name. And they walked out, and again, like I say, nothing else happened. Now the church members came up to my great-grandfather and said, "Man, how did you know who they were? How could you possibly know?" He said, "I recognized them by their shoes." Everybody in that little town was poor. Everybody had one pair of shoes, and they all worked down at the sawmill. And he saw the white folks who worked at the sawmill. He knew that was Mr. Adams' shoes, and he knew that was Mr. Jones' shoes, and he knew those were Mr. Smith's shoes. So he called them all by name, even though their faces were covered and they're in their Klan gear. And when my professor, my mentor, as such, my principal investigator, told me that I didn't deserve to finish my PhD, the only reason I was going to finish was because he told my committee that I should finish. The first thing that came to my mind was my great-grandfather standing up in front of that Klan and calling them by name. And I thought to myself at that time, you don't know the people I come from. And it was all I could see. I'm laughing now. It was all I could do at that time not to laugh in his face. And I defended the next day, and I'm Dr. Karama Neal now. I think, I think when we think about perseverance and grit, I'm glad you mentioned that. I hadn't thought about this in this context, but I think, I do think it's really important to recognize how other people have persevered and had grit, and how we can be inspired by them and we can learn by them, because that saved me. Had in a different situation, perhaps had I not grown up with that particular story, right? He might have said that to me and I might have been sad. I might have been scared. I might have been nervous. I might have started begging. I might have started crying. I might have got angry. I might have hit it. Who knows what would have happened, right? Instead, it was all I could do not to laugh in his face. Like, you don't have any idea who I come. You don't have any idea who my people are. And I think if we can all find those stories, whether they're family stories or community stories or historical stories or other kinds of stories, if you can find those stories that are meaningful to you in your life and use them when you need them, right? Keep them active in your mind, so that just like I described, I didn't think about that. I didn't think, now what can I think about to make myself better? It just came to me. I just saw myself just like my great-grandfather standing in front of that Klan. That's what I saw immediately. I didn't have to think about it. It was because that story was so ingrained in me. I think we all can find stories like that and keep them close so we can use them at the appropriate time.
Mm-hmm. And, I think one of the things that I appreciate about that, because it does so much to speak to one's worth, who you are, and that's from within. And when you're clear about that, it doesn't matter what your condition is around you, you can do it. You can just stand up. And like you said, it took everything in me to laugh at the person who was trying to intimidate me, right? Mm-hmm. And just be like, you don't even know me. You don't know who I am. You know where I come from. Excuse me, I'm about to defend. You know what I mean? Like, step out of my way. And that's exactly what we're talking about. Yeah. So yeah, I appreciate that. And I think that, along with the goals setting and so forth, is what gives us that grit, because it's internal. Mm-hmm. It's something you can walk with, right?
Mm-hmm. And you can develop it. The other thing I would say is you can develop it, right? If you don't feel like you have that now, then just be intentional about it. How do I develop that? How can I think through these things? How can I take others as examples, modern day, past day? How can I you can develop that. So don't feel like you're stuck in, I haven't had grit before. So what? Move on. Develop it.
That's right. Yeah. Well, this is our last question. And you just shared a lot of wonderful jewels. And this is just, is there anything else you'd like to say to the scholars who'll be watching this?
There's two things. So you helpfully sent the questions in advance, so I did get to think a little bit about them before. There's two things I would say here. One is, don't self-reject, right? Don't look at a situation and say, I can't do that. Or, somebody else has got that. I'm not going to be competitive for that. Or I can't do it. One of the things I've found is I've been able to be in, lots of different environments, corporate environments, academic environments, government environments, other kinds of environments, is that, sometimes what we might think is unattainable or inaccessible or beyond our skill set, oftentimes it's not. Oftentimes it's not, and we self-reject. We take ourselves out of the running before we can even be in the running to see. And I give two. They're sort of silly, but they were very meaningful to me. Two examples. My mother ran her first road race. She was always physically active and walked and did stuff, but she and would compete in sort of like do like the breast cancer 5K here in Little Rock and that kind of stuff. But she had never competed in a race that like had a prize before. And she was 66 years old. She came to Atlanta one time and we ran a race that focused on sickle cell anemia. And it was designed to raise money for that. And so there were two sections of the race. There was a 4K race where your mother ran and some of her friends did that race. And my mother said she wanted to do the 7K race, 7 kilometers. And so I did the 7-kilometer race with her. And most of the time we walked. I think she did a little bit of running, but we walked and stuff most of the time. And I knew that this race had a lot of different prizes at it. They would give like, the age categories were kind of narrow, and then they would give like first, second, third place, that kind of thing. And as the 4K people broke off from the path, the 7K people kept going. And as I remember walking with her, I'd done the race before, she had not. And I remember walking with her, and I kept seeing other people on the 7K path, and I didn't see anybody who was her age, who looked like they were her age. And we kept going, and I said, "Mommy, I think you might get a medal. You might do well." She's like, "Oh, Karama, don't," because she never won a race. She's not, and she's 66 years old. I'm not thinking about that. And we keep going a little while. And I was like, I'm not seeing anybody out here that looks anywhere near as old as you are. And I said, "Mommy, I really think you might win." "Karama, just shut up. I'm not here to have fun. I'm not trying to, win a race. I'm just having fun." So she told me to be quiet. So I was quiet. So we finished the race. Went out for the award ceremony just to hang out and enjoy and stuff. It was a nice day. We were in Atlanta. And they did all the prizes. They did the walkers, and then they get to the runners, and they said, "Women 65 and up, Janet Cobb." And my mother just, whoa, she ran down there. She was so excited. I'm 66. And she got her medal, got her trophy. I got a picture of her with her trophy. She had to rearrange, pack all her stuff because she had this big trophy to carry back home to Arkansas. And the reason I tell that story is because nobody else was in that race. She was the only one who was 66 and above in the 7K race. She was the only one there, and she won. And that's not to minimize her race. It's to say, I stood up and I said, I can do it, right? Very similarly, our daughter at one point ran a race. This one was around prostate cancer here in Little Rock. We're about to do that race coming up in a few weeks again. But one of the early times she ran that race, she got out there and she's just running and having fun and enjoying this as a 5K. And we get to the award ceremony. We knew a bunch of the people who were organizing that race. So we just hung out for the award ceremony to chit chat and talk to folks and such. And they started calling names, and they called her name, Boaitey, first place, her age category. And she was stunned. And as it turned out, again, she was the only one in that category. Now, there were probably some other girls. And in fact, that morning, our daughter didn't want to get up that morning. It was early in the morning. It was Saturday. And she was like, "I don't want to go. I don't want to get up. It's too early." And she was a little girl. It's understandable. But I was like, no, we said we're going to do it. We did it. And she got up and she went there and she won. Now, there might have been 10 other little girls that same age who decided to sleep in that morning. But had they gotten up, they might have won. They might have won first place, might have won second place or third place, but they didn't do it. I don't know if they really were or not. But my point is, don't self-select. Don't take yourself out of the running. Put yourself out there and do it. And the last thing I would say, is there's a book, no one has ever asked me, what's the most impactful book you've ever read? But if someone had asked me that, one of the top books would be this book called, well, I'm not going to say the name of it because I feel bad. The person who wrote it.
Go on. It's okay. It's okay.
It's okay.
It's in context.
Okay. Well, I actually don't remember the name of the author, but the name of the book was called Nappy. And I remember I got it in grad school, and it had a picture of a.
What was it called, Karama?
It was called Nappy. 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 And it had a picture of a Black woman with a short little natural hairstyle, and she looked young, about the same age as me. And I remember it was on the remainder shelf. I think I paid $2 for it. And I picked it up, and I was like, "Oh, this is kind of interesting." And the bio it talked about a woman, the author, who's, like I say, whose name honestly I really don't remember right off. But it talked about her, and it looked like she was about the same age as me. And I was like, "Oh, this is kind of interesting." So I just got it. It was $2, no big deal. So I got it and I read it, and everything in the book was, I felt like, and I didn't make it sound like I was bragging, but it felt like I had done more than that. You know, she was talking about, oh, I went and got my master's degree. I was like, well, I'm getting a PhD. She was like, you know, how hard it was and how her grandmother got annoyed with her when she cut her hair. And at that point, I was wearing my hair shaved. That's like, many people might know Joyce Elliott, the state senator here who wears her hair. My hair was very much like that. I wore my hair like that for 12 years. I was like, well, she just cut her hair in a little. I said, mine is shaved. And it, like, everything she did, I was like, I could have written this book. And that was the key. I could have, but I didn't. And she did. And frankly, most people aren't going to read the book, and they may not know that there were some editorial kinds of mistakes in there. And they're just going to know she wrote a book, and they're going to be rightfully impressed, because she did do it. She did. Somebody said you should write a book or whatever. I don't know how it happens. I don't know who she is, but she put that book together and she wrote it, and it's published, and it's on our shelf right now behind you. It is. So I say that because that book really did make an impression on me, because like I said, I read it when I was in graduate school. And what it said to me is, if you feel like you need to do something, do it. Don't wait. Don't say, oh, I could have. Don't wait 5 years now. That was my idea. I had that same idea 3 years ago. Well, you didn't do anything with it. It doesn't matter if you don't do anything with it. You know, you got to figure out how to do something with it. So that I would say is another lesson. Is at least it has been for me, and hopefully it's helpful for others as well. If you see an opportunity, you know, you got to be smart about it, right? You can't do everything all at once. But if there's something you feel like you can move forward, or you can drive it, or you can make this project happen, or make this goal happen, or do something, see what you can do. It's better than having regrets. You don't want to be in a situation where you're like, well, I could have done it, and then so-and-so had the same idea, and now they're making plenty of money off of it, or they, you know, were able to do such and such because they did it, and I just was like, I don't know, I'm scared. You know, put yourself out there. It's related to the don't self-reject. Don't if you're not going to get it, let somebody else tell you you're not going to get it. And you know you tried. You know you put out ideally your best effort, and you tried, and you gave it your best shot. And you'll just be all the more prepared for the next time. That's much better than having regrets and saying, well, I should have. I'll never know if I could have. You don't want to be in that situation.
Mm-hmm. That's a wonderful way to close, because, you know, the acronym AVID stands for Advancement via Individual Determination. Mm-hmm. That's what AVID means.
I should have looked that up. It's important.
But that's what was just said. Mm-hmm. That's exactly what, you know, that's your last words. It's individual determination to go for it, to do it. And you kind of compass in on yourself. And that's really the thing that we're working towards. You find that thing where you're like, you know, I'm going to do it. I want to do it. And I know why. I'm going for it. So thank you very much. We really appreciate it. You guys got some, I know you have, I'm not going to say hopefully, I'm sure you got some great nuggets that you can keep in your thoughts. And maybe when the pandemic and everything kind of clears and our situation is better, we may, you know, maybe Dr. Neal might pop in to class sometime. So we'll see in the spring or so forth. Nevertheless, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Boaitey. Thank you to all the students. Again, very much appreciate this opportunity. I wish each of you, every success, and hold on to everything you're learning and just go forth and shine.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.